The security footage from Al-Noor Private Hospital's staff parking garage showed nurse Maricel Santos walking toward her Toyota Corolla at 11:43 p.m. on October 8, 2019. She carried her usual canvas tote bag, her phone pressed to her ear, apparently speaking to someone as she approached her car in the dimly lit section reserved for night shift staff. The camera angle captured her pausing beside the driver's door, still talking, her free hand fumbling for keys in her bag. Then something changed. Her body language shifted from relaxed to rigid. She lowered the phone. Her head turned toward something or someone outside the camera's field of vision. What happened in the next 47 seconds would haunt investigators for months. Maricel took 3 steps backward, away from her car, her hands rising in what appeared to be a defensive or placating gesture. A dark sedan, later identified as a Mercedes S-Class with tinted windows and deliberately obscured license plates, pulled into frame. 2 men emerged from the vehicle with practiced efficiency. There was no struggle, no screaming that activated the garage's audio sensors. Just a brief conversation invisible to lip readers due to poor lighting and camera angle, then Maricel being guided, not dragged, not forced, but guided with hands on her elbows, into the back seat of the Mercedes. Her car remained in the parking space, keys later found on the ground beside the driver's door. Her phone was discovered 3 days later in a dumpster 2 kilometers away, its SIM card removed, its memory wiped clean. And nurse Maricel Santos, 28 years old, a decorated healthcare professional who had saved countless lives during her 4 years in Dubai, vanished as completely as if she had never existed. The investigation that followed would expose a story of obsession, entitlement, and the terrifying vulnerability of women who exist at the intersection of poverty and power. It would reveal that the patient Maricel had cared for during his final illness had made her a promise that sounded like gratitude but was actually a threat. "When I'm well enough, I want one last night with you, to thank you properly for saving my life." Maricel had smiled politely, deflected gracefully, and reported the inappropriate comment to her supervisor. She had done everything right. But in a city where wealth purchases impunity and foreign workers' complaints disappear into bureaucratic black holes, doing everything right was not enough to protect her. This is the story of what happens when a dying man's obsession becomes a wealthy man's entitlement, when medical care becomes confused with obligation, and when a nurse's compassion is repaid with abduction and horrors that would take investigators 18 months to fully uncover. But this story doesn't begin with disappearance. It begins 7 months earlier in the ICU of Dubai's most exclusive private hospital, where a man who had never heard the word no was about to meet the one person who wouldn't give him what he wanted, no matter how much he was willing to pay. March 15, 2019. Al-Noor Private Hospital, where rooms cost $5,000 daily and discretion was more valuable than any medical equipment. The hospital catered to Dubai's ultra-wealthy, oil sheiks recovering from cosmetic procedures, European executives being treated for stress-related conditions, Russian oligarchs requiring vitamin infusions that were probably something else entirely. The ICU's Suite 7, the largest and most expensive, had been occupied for 3 days by Khalid bin Rashid Al-Manama, a 62-year-old Emirati businessman whose heart had finally rebelled against decades of rich food, minimal exercise, and the kind of stress that comes from managing a billion-dollar empire built on construction contracts and real estate speculation. The heart attack had been massive, the kind that kills most people before they reach the hospital. But Khalid's security team had been trained for exactly this scenario. Within 6 minutes of his collapse during a business dinner at Atmosphere, the world's highest restaurant, he was in an ambulance. Within 14 minutes, he was in Al-Noor's state-of-the-art cardiac unit. Within 30 minutes, surgeons were performing emergency angioplasty, clearing blocked arteries and installing stents that would buy him another decade if he made lifestyle changes he had no intention of making. The surgery saved his life, but the recovery would be complicated. At 62, overweight, diabetic with liver damage from years of social drinking despite religious prohibitions, Khalid was a poor candidate for smooth recovery. His medical team anticipated weeks of intensive care, careful monitoring, and the kind of round-the-clock nursing that required staff with exceptional skills and infinite patience. Nurse Maricel Santos was assigned to his case on her third night shift rotation. She arrived at 7:00 p.m. for handover, receiving detailed briefings from the day nurse about medication schedules, vital sign parameters, dietary restrictions, and the patient's tendency toward imperious behavior despite his weakened state. "He's demanding," Nurse Fatima warned, a Lebanese woman with 15 years' experience in private health care. "Asks for things constantly, wants his phone even though he's supposed to avoid stress. Complains about food, about temperature, about everything. But his family is important, so administration wants him kept happy." Maricel nodded, unintimidated. At 28, she had 4 years of Dubai nursing experience and 3 years before that at Philippine General Hospital in Manila, where she had learned to handle difficult patients in conditions far more chaotic than this pristine facility. Born on November 3, 1991 in Tacloban City, Leyte, Maricel had grown up in a lower middle-class family that valued education above all else. Her father, Ramon, was a public school teacher whose modest salary barely supported 4 children. Her mother, Teresita, worked as a government clerk, her income supplementing her husband's just enough to keep the family housed and fed. Maricel had been an exceptional student, the kind teachers remember long after graduation. She had graduated valedictorian from her high school, earning a full scholarship to University of the Philippines Manila's nursing program. She had completed her degree with honors, passed the nursing board exam on her first attempt with scores in the top 5% nationally, and immediately began working at Philippine General Hospital. But even as a registered nurse in the Philippines, her salary was 18,000 pesos monthly, approximately $350. It was enough to survive on, but not enough to help her family, not enough to save for the future, not enough to feel like the education she had worked so hard for was actually creating the upward mobility it promised. So in 2015, at 24, Maricel joined the exodus of Filipino healthcare professionals seeking opportunities abroad. She passed the Dubai Health Authority's licensing requirements, secured employment with Al Noor Hospital, and arrived in the UAE with the same mixture of hope and trepidation that millions of overseas Filipino workers carried with them. The difference was that Maricel had a professional visa, a good salary of 15,000 dirhams monthly, approximately $4,000, and the respect that came with being a highly skilled healthcare worker rather than a domestic helper. Her accommodation was hospital-provided, a decent apartment shared with 2 other Filipino nurses. Her working conditions, while demanding, were professional and structured. She sent 8,000 dirhams home monthly, supporting her parents, retirement savings, and her younger sister's university education. She saved another 3,000 dirhams for her own future. The remaining 4,000 covered her living expenses with enough left over for occasional luxuries like dinner at a nice restaurant or a weekend beach trip with friends. By 2019, Maricel had built a good life in Dubai. She had a close-knit Filipino nurse community, regular video calls with family, and the quiet satisfaction of work done well. She was considering pursuing a master's degree in nursing through an online program, possibly transitioning into hospital administration eventually. She was careful, professional, and conscious of the boundaries that female healthcare workers needed to maintain when caring for male patients, especially in a culture where gender interactions were carefully regulated and misunderstandings could have serious consequences. All of these qualities made her an excellent nurse. None of them would protect her from what was coming. Maricel's first interaction with Khalid Al-Manama occurred at 8:15 p.m. on her first shift caring for him. She entered Suite 7 with practiced efficiency, reviewing his chart on the digital tablet, noting that his vitals had been stable for the past 6 hours, but his pain medication was due for adjustment. Khalid was awake, propped up in the hospital bed that probably cost more than most people's cars. Despite his recent brush with death, he retained the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His beard was perfectly groomed, Apparently his barber had visited that afternoon. His private room smelled of expensive cologne rather than the antiseptic hospital smell that permeated standard wards. "Good evening, Mr. Al-Manama," Maricel said in her professional tone, warm but not familiar. "I'm Nurse Maricel. I'll be caring for you during the night shift. How are you feeling?" Khalid's eyes, which had been closed, opened to study her with an intensity that immediately made her uncomfortable. His gaze traveled from her face down her body in a way that felt invasive despite her loose-fitting scrubs. "Better now," he said, his voice rough from intubation but carrying unmistakable suggestion. "They didn't tell me my night nurse would be so beautiful." Maricel's smile didn't waver, but internally she catalogued this as a red flag. "Let's check your vitals," she said, moving to the monitors with professional detachment, deliberately ignoring the comment. She spent the next 10 minutes conducting her assessment. Blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen saturation, checking IV lines, reviewing medication pumps. Khalid watched her throughout, making comments that towed the line between friendly conversation and inappropriate flirtation. "You're Filipino?" he asked. "I've always thought Filipino women are the most beautiful in Asia, so graceful, so naturally caring." "We take pride in our healthcare training," Maricel replied, steering the conversation toward professional topics. "The Philippines produces some of the world's best nurses." "I'm sure you're the best of the best," Khalid continued. "How long have you been in Dubai? Do you have a husband, boyfriend?" "My personal life isn't relevant to your care," Maricel said gently but firmly. "Is your pain level manageable? The doctor can adjust your medication if you're experiencing discomfort." Khalid's expression shifted, recognizing the boundary being drawn. "I'm fine," he said curtly. "Just trying to make conversation. It's lonely in here." "I understand," Maricel said with genuine sympathy. "Recovery can be isolating. Would you like me to arrange for the television to be set up? Or I can have someone bring books or magazines if you prefer reading." The shift continued with Khalid testing boundaries in small ways, requesting back rubs that Maricel politely redirected to the physical therapist, asking her to adjust his pillows in ways that required her to lean close, complimenting her appearance repeatedly despite her consistent deflection. By the end of her 12-hour shift, Maricel was exhausted not from the medical care, but from the constant emotional labor of maintaining professional boundaries with a patient who clearly didn't respect them. She documented everything in her nursing notes, using careful language that communicated the issue without making accusations that could backfire on her. Patient displaying inappropriate interpersonal behavior with female staff. Recommend male nurse assignment if available, or strict professional protocols enforced during care delivery. Her supervisor read the notes and sighed. "I'll talk to administration," she said, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "But the family has specifically requested our best cardiac nurses. You're one of them. Can you manage for a few more shifts until we arrange alternatives?" Maricel agreed, because refusing would mark her as difficult, potentially affecting her performance reviews and contract renewal. This was the calculation that healthcare workers made constantly. How much discomfort to endure to maintain employment, how many boundaries to let slide to avoid being labeled problematic. Over the following weeks, Khalid's condition improved steadily. His heart function stabilized, his mobility increased, and he transitioned from ICU to a luxury recovery suite. Throughout this progression, Maricel remained one of his primary nurses, assigned because she was genuinely skilled, and because Khalid's family had begun requesting her specifically, praising her professionalism and competence. What they didn't see, what happened during late-night shifts when family visitors had gone home, was Khalid's escalating obsession. The gifts started in the second week. A box of expensive Swiss chocolates appeared with Maricel's name on it. She politely declined, explaining hospital policy against accepting gifts from patients. The next night, a designer scarf appeared, then jewelry, then an envelope containing 5,000 dirhams in cash. "I can't accept any of these," Maricel said firmly, returning the envelope unopened. "It's not appropriate and it violates professional ethics." I'm just grateful for the care you've provided, Khalid insisted. You saved my life. These are tokens of appreciation, nothing more. Your recovery is my job, Maricel replied. I don't need additional compensation. Please stop sending gifts. But Khalid interpreted her refusal as playing hard to get rather than genuine disinterest. In his world, everything was for sale. Services, loyalty, even affection. He had never encountered someone who couldn't be bought, and Maricel's resistance made her more appealing rather than less. His comments became more explicitly sexual. During bed baths, which Maricel tried to delegate to male nurses whenever possible, Khalid would make remarks about his body that were clearly designed to make her uncomfortable. He began, accidentally, exposing himself, claiming weakness made it difficult to maintain the hospital gown properly. Maricel documented everything, reporting to her supervisor repeatedly. But administration's response was always the same. Just a few more days. He's being discharged soon. Can you just manage until then? The breaking point came on April 23rd, exactly 5 weeks after Khalid's admission. He was scheduled for discharge the following morning, healthy enough to continue recovery at home with visiting nurses. Maricel was assigned to his final night shift, conducting last checks before his departure. At 2:30 a.m., when the hospital was quietest and staffing minimal, Khalid pressed his call button. Maricel responded, finding him sitting up in bed, looking more alert and healthy than he had since admission. I wanted to thank you properly before I leave, he said, his tone serious. You saved my life, Maricel. I'll never forget what you did for me. I'm glad you've recovered, Maricel said, maintaining her position near the door. You have excellent prospects for full health if you follow your cardiologist's recommendations. I want to do something for you, Khalid continued. Name anything, a better apartment, a car, money for your family. I'm a wealthy man and I believe in rewarding people who serve me well. That's not necessary, Maricel said. Your recovery is all the reward I need. Khalid's expression darkened. Don't be foolish. I'm offering to change your life. Most people would be grateful for such generosity. I am grateful for your kind thoughts, Maricel said carefully, recognizing the danger of offending someone powerful. But I can't accept gifts beyond what my professional role allows. When I'm well enough, Khalid said, his voice taking on an edge that made Maricel's skin crawl, I want one last night with you, not as nurse and patient, but as a man and a woman, to thank you properly for saving my life. I'll make it worth your while. Name your price. The proposition hung in the air between them, its implications crystal clear. Maricel felt ice water flood her veins, but her training and experience kept her voice steady. Mr. Al-Manama, I'm your nurse, not a companion available for purchase. What you're suggesting is inappropriate and impossible. I'm going to pretend you never said that and attribute it to medication effects. But if you ever make such a suggestion again, I'll be forced to report it formally. She left the room immediately, her heart pounding, and documented the incident in detail. She reported to her night supervisor, who looked troubled but ultimately said what Maricel had expected. He's discharging tomorrow. Just avoid being alone with him for the next few hours. Once he's gone, this will all be behind you. But it wasn't behind her, it was just beginning. Khalid Al-Manama was discharged on April 24, 2019, with instructions for follow-up care, lifestyle modifications, and scheduled cardiology appointments. He left Al-Noor Hospital seemingly healthy, thanking the staff with generous tips that everyone except Maricel accepted, and departed in a convoy of luxury vehicles befitting his status. Maricel breathed a sigh of relief. She had successfully navigated a difficult patient situation, maintained her professional boundaries, and could now return to normal nursing duties without the constant stress of managing inappropriate behavior. For 6 months, life returned to normal. She cared for other patients, worked her shifts, sent money home, and made plans for her future. The incident with Khalid faded from immediate memory, becoming just another difficult patient story to share with colleagues over coffee. But Khalid hadn't forgotten. Throughout his recovery at home, as he regained strength and resumed control of his business empire, his obsession with Maricel intensified rather than faded. To his twisted logic, she had saved his life, which created a debt. More perversely, her refusal of his gifts and rejection of his proposition made her a challenge, something he couldn't buy, which only increased her value in his mind. He made inquiries through his network, learning everything about Maricel that could be discovered. Her full name, home address, family situation in the Philippines, financial status, social connections, daily routines. The investigation was thorough, conducted by private security professionals who specialized in information gathering for Dubai's wealthy elite. By September 2019, Khalid had decided that if Maricel wouldn't accept his generosity willingly, he would create circumstances that forced her compliance. He had resources, connections, and the kind of moral flexibility that came from a lifetime of having every desire satisfied. The plan he developed was elegant in its simplicity. He would create a situation where Maricel had no choice but to spend time with him, away from the protected environment of the hospital, where her refusal would have immediate and devastating consequences for her family. The key was leverage, and leverage required vulnerability. Khalid's investigators identified Maricel's younger sister, Carmen, who was in her final year at University of Santo Tomas in Manila. Carmen's tuition was paid by Maricel's remittances. If that money stopped, Carmen would be forced to withdraw, her education incomplete, her future opportunities destroyed. Khalid's team in Manila approached Carmen with a proposition disguised as opportunity. A scholarship program for outstanding students, funded by an anonymous Gulf benefactor, offering to cover her final year's tuition plus a stipend for living expenses. All she needed to do was sign some paperwork and provide contact information for her next of kin. Carmen, overwhelmed by what seemed like miraculous good fortune, signed without suspicion. She called Maricel excitedly to share the news, never realizing she had just handed her sister's enemies a weapon. Armed with this leverage and detailed knowledge of Maricel's routine, Khalid finalized his plan. It would unfold in early October, during a period when Maricel was scheduled for night shifts, when her disappearance for 24-48 hours might not immediately trigger alarms, when the timing would give him maximum control. On October 7th, 2019, Maricel received a phone call from a number with a Manila area code. The caller identified himself as Dr. Rodriguez from University of Santo Tomas, requesting to speak about her sister Carmen's scholarship. "We've discovered some irregularities in the scholarship documentation," the fake Dr. Rodriguez explained, his accent and manner perfectly believable. "Nothing that Carmen did wrong, but administrative errors that need correction. Unfortunately, if we can't resolve this within 48 hours, we'll have to revoke the scholarship and Carmen will need to pay this semester's tuition in full." Maricel's blood ran cold. She didn't have that kind of money available immediately. "What kind of irregularities?" she asked, her nursing training making her question suspicious situations. "Technical issues I can't discuss over the phone," the caller said. "But there's a representative of the Scholarship Foundation in Dubai who can explain everything and help resolve this quickly. He's requested a meeting with you tomorrow evening. Can you make yourself available?" Every instinct told Maricel this was wrong, but the threat to Carmen's education was real enough to make her hesitate. "Let me call Carmen first," she said. "Of course," the caller agreed smoothly. "But please understand the time sensitivity. The foundation representative is only in Dubai briefly. If you can't meet tomorrow, the scholarship will be automatically revoked and there's nothing we can do." Maricel called Carmen immediately after hanging up. Her sister confirmed that yes, she had received a scholarship from a Gulf foundation. Yes, there had been some paperwork that seemed complicated. Carmen was worried now, afraid she had done something wrong, begging Maricel to meet with whoever could fix the problem. Caught between her protective instincts for her sister and her suspicion about the situation, Maricel made a compromise decision. She would agree to the meeting, but in a public place, during daylight hours, with safety precautions in place. She called the number back. "I can meet on October 9th at 6:00 p.m. at City Center Dera in the food court. I'll have 1 hour available. There was a pause, then. The representative's schedule requires an evening meeting at a private location where you can discuss sensitive financial matters. He'll send a car to collect you from the hospital after your shift on October 8th. The meeting will take no more than 2 hours, and you'll be returned safely. I don't think so, Maricel said firmly. Public location or no meeting. Ms. Santos, the voice became harder, let me be frank. Your sister's education depends on your cooperation. The Foundation's representative is a very important man who is going out of his way to help resolve this situation. Refusing to meet on his terms will be interpreted as lack of serious interest in maintaining the scholarship. Is that really the message you want to send? The manipulation was textbook, but effective. Maricel found herself agreeing to conditions she knew were dangerous, rationalizing that it was just one meeting, that if things felt wrong she could leave, that surely nothing terrible would happen in a city as safe and modern as Dubai. She took precautions anyway. She told her roommate about the meeting, though she downplayed the suspicious elements to avoid sounding paranoid. She made sure her phone was fully charged. She wore her hospital ID badge, believing somehow that visible identification would provide protection. On October 8, 2019, at 11:43 p.m., Maricel walked toward her car in the hospital parking garage, speaking to Carmen on the phone, trying to reassure her sister that everything would be fine. She saw the Mercedes sedan pull into view and hesitated, every instinct screaming danger. But Carmen's voice in her ear, anxious and trusting, made the decision for her. When the two men emerged from the Mercedes and approached with professional courtesy, identifying themselves as representatives of the Scholarship Foundation, Maricel lowered her defenses just enough. "We'll have you back within 2 hours," one of them said, his English perfect, his manner unthreatening. "Mr. Al-Manama is very grateful for your care during his illness and wants to personally explain the scholarship situation and ensure everything is resolved favorably." The mention of Khalid's name should have been the final warning, should have sent Maricel running back into the hospital's safety. But the men were already gently guiding her toward the car, speaking soothingly, assuring her this was all routine, that she was being paranoid for no reason. The security camera captured her getting into the Mercedes. It did not capture what happened after the car exited the parking garage and disappeared into Dubai's nighttime traffic. The first 24 hours of Maricel's disappearance were marked by confusion rather than alarm. Her roommates noticed she hadn't returned home after her shift, but assumed she had picked up overtime or gone out with friends. Her absence from her scheduled shift on October 9th raised more concern, as Maricel was known for perfect attendance and reliability. By October 10th, when Maricel failed to respond to any calls or messages and hadn't been seen for 36 hours, her roommate filed a missing person report with Dubai police. The report was taken, documented, but not initially treated with urgency. Adult women sometimes disappeared temporarily for personal reasons. Maricel had no history of instability, but that didn't mean she hadn't made a spontaneous decision to travel or needed space for undisclosed reasons. The security footage from the hospital parking garage changed everything. Detective Rashid Al-Balushi, assigned to investigate, reviewed the tape and immediately recognized this as an abduction rather than voluntary disappearance. The body language, the car with obscured plates, the systematic nature of the approach, all indicated planning and criminal intent. But identifying the Mercedes sedan proved nearly impossible. The license plate had been deliberately covered with mud in strategic patterns that obscured identifying numbers while looking accidental. The car's make and model were common among Dubai's wealthy, with thousands of similar vehicles registered. Without the plate numbers, tracking the specific vehicle was like finding one grain of sand on a beach. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Carmen Santos, Maricel's sister, received a phone call on October 12th from someone claiming to be from the Scholarship Foundation. The caller informed her that her sister had met with their representative, that documentation issues had been resolved, and that her scholarship was secure. Carmen, who had been frantic with worry since learning of Maricel's disappearance, immediately reported this call to Philippine authorities, who coordinated with Dubai police. The phone number was tracked to a prepaid mobile purchased with fake identification. But the timing of the call and its content confirmed that Maricel's disappearance was connected to the scholarship scheme. Detective Al-Balushi began investigating the scholarship itself, which led to a shell foundation registered in Manila but funded through accounts in the Cayman Islands. The trail was deliberately obscured, but financial forensics eventually connected the accounts to business entities controlled by Khalid Al-Manama. On October 15th, 1 week after Maricel's disappearance, Detective Al-Balushi obtained a warrant to interview Khalid. The billionaire received him in his Emirates Hills mansion, surrounded by lawyers, projecting wounded dignity at being questioned about a missing nurse. "I was her patient for 5 weeks," Khalid said with perfect composure. "I'm grateful for her excellent care, but I haven't seen or contacted her since my discharge in April. Why would I have anything to do with her disappearance?" "We have evidence linking you to a scholarship scheme involving her sister," Al-Balushi said, watching carefully for reactions. "I fund many scholarships through various foundations," Khalid replied smoothly. "I couldn't possibly know the names of every recipient. If someone used my charitable foundations to commit fraud, I'm as much a victim as anyone." The interview went nowhere. Khalid's lawyers had prepared him perfectly, creating plausible deniability for every connection, explaining away every suspicious element with alternative interpretations that were technically possible if implausible. Without a body, without witnesses, without direct evidence connecting Khalid to Maricel's abduction, the investigation stalled. Detective Al-Balushi knew in his gut that Khalid was responsible, but knowing and proving were vastly different things. Meanwhile, Maricel Santos existed in a nightmare that would last 73 days. The villa where Maricel was held was in Fujairah, one of the UAE's 7 emirates, located on the country's east coast facing the Gulf of Oman. It was remote, accessible only by roads that wound through mountain passes, situated in an area where privacy was guaranteed by geography and where neighbors were too far away to hear anything suspicious. The bedroom where she was confined was luxurious in the way that made the imprisonment more surreal. King-sized bed with silk sheets, ensuite bathroom with marble fixtures, air conditioning that kept the space comfortable despite the desert heat outside. Windows were barred decoratively, with wrought iron designs that looked artistic until you tested them and discovered they were immovably strong. Khalid visited every 3 to 4 days, arriving in the evening and staying until morning. The first visit, he explained the rules with the calm rationality of someone negotiating a business contract. "You'll stay here until I'm satisfied that you've fulfilled your obligation to me," he said, sitting in an armchair while Maricel sat on the bed as far from him as the room allowed. "You saved my life. I've given your sister financial security. Now you'll give me what I want, which is your companionship, your time, and your body. Fight me, and this situation becomes unpleasant for both of us. Accept reality, and I'll treat you very well." "This is kidnapping," Maricel said, her voice shaking but defiant. "You can't just imprison people because you want them." "Can't I?" Khalid replied with genuine curiosity. "I've done exactly that, and no one has stopped me. Your colleagues think you've run away. Your family thinks you're busy at work. The scholarship ensures they won't ask too many questions. Who exactly is going to rescue you?" He stood, approaching the bed. "I'm not a monster, Maricel. I don't want to hurt you. I just want what I've wanted since you first walked into my hospital room. One night turned into many nights. Your time in exchange for your sister's future. It's a simple transaction." What followed was rape disguised as seduction, violence masked by Khalid's insistence that this was romance, that Maricel would eventually understand that his obsession was actually love. He was delusional in the way that power makes people delusional, unable to comprehend that coercion negates consent, that fear is not desire, that imprisonment is not intimacy. Maricel survived by dissociating, by mentally removing herself from her body during Khalid's visits, by focusing on the certainty that someone, somewhere, was looking for her. She refused to give him the performance of willing participation he craved, responding with silence and stillness that frustrated him, but that she clung to as her last form of resistance. The guards who maintained the villa were Pakistani and Indian migrant workers, men whose own visa status made them complicit in Maricel's captivity. They brought her meals, ensured she had necessities, but refused to help or engage in conversation beyond functional necessity. They were prisoners of a different kind, trapped by debt and dependency, unable to risk helping her without destroying their own lives. Weeks blurred together. Maricel tracked time by counting Khalid's visits, by watching the light change through her barred windows, by the routine of meals delivered at consistent times. She contemplated suicide, even attempted it once with a broken piece of mirror, but survival instinct and the thought of her family stopped her from completing the act. Her nursing training helped her maintain sanity. She monitored her own health, exercised in her room to maintain strength, established routines that gave structure to the formless days. She noted everything about the villa's layout during the rare moments when she was allowed to move through other areas, memorizing potential escape routes she never had opportunity to attempt. By December, Khalid's interest was beginning to wane. The novelty of his captive had faded. Her refusal to perform willing participation had made the experience less satisfying than he had imagined. He began visiting less frequently, his stays shorter, his attention already moving toward whatever would obsess him next. On December 20th, 2019, Khalid arrived with a proposition. "I'm bored with this arrangement," he said bluntly. "You've been unsatisfying. I'm prepared to release you, but there are conditions." Maricel, who had barely spoken in weeks, found her voice. "What conditions?" "You'll sign documents stating that you left your employment voluntarily, that you spent this time traveling for personal reasons, that you have no complaints against anyone. You'll never speak about this to police, media, or anyone else. In exchange, I'll give you 100,000 dirhams and arrange for you to leave the UAE immediately with no visa complications." "And if I refuse?" Maricel asked, though she already knew the answer. "Then this continues indefinitely," Khalid said simply. "Or I arrange for you to disappear permanently, your choice." It wasn't a choice. It was the illusion of choice, the kind powerful people offer to make victims complicit in their own victimization. Maricel signed the documents with shaking hands, her signature a lie that purchased her freedom but guaranteed her silence. On December 22nd, 2019, 73 days after her abduction, Maricel Santos was released near Dubai International Airport with cash, a plane ticket to Manila, and threats that kept her silent about her ordeal for months afterward. Maricel's return to the Philippines should have been joyful, but trauma had transformed her. She arrived in Manila on December 23rd, timing her return during Christmas when airports were chaotic, and her family's questions about her long absence could be deflected with vague explanations about work stress and needed vacation. Her mother knew immediately that something terrible had happened. The physical signs were obvious: weight loss, haunted eyes, flinching at unexpected sounds. But Maricel's insistence that she was fine, that she had simply needed time away from Dubai's pressure, created a barrier that Teresita didn't know how to breach. Carmen, whose scholarship had been the lever used to trap her sister, sensed her role in Maricel's suffering without understanding specifics. The guilt manifested in changed behavior. She became withdrawn, struggled with her final semester despite the financial security that scholarship provided, and avoided being alone with Maricel as if proximity would reveal truths she wasn't ready to face. Maricel spent Christmas and New Year in a dissociative haze, present physically but absent emotionally. She attended Mass, participated in family gatherings, smiled for photographs, all while experiencing the world through thick glass that separated her from genuine feeling. In January 2020, she received a message through Facebook from an anonymous account. No words, just a photograph. Carmen walking across her university campus, unaware she was being photographed, the implication clear. They were still watching. Silence was not optional, it was ongoing requirement for her family's safety. The psychological burden became unbearable. Maricel began having panic attacks, nightmares that left her screaming and drenched in sweat. She couldn't bear being in enclosed spaces. Male voices made her physically ill. The thought of returning to nursing, of being in positions where she cared for vulnerable patients, triggered cascading anxiety that made normal functioning impossible. In March 2020, she attempted suicide for the second time, overdosing on sleeping pills her mother's medicine cabinet. Carmen found her in time, rushed her to the hospital where doctors pumped her stomach and saved her life. The psychiatric evaluation that followed diagnosed severe PTSD, major depression, and recommended intensive trauma therapy. It was during this hospitalization that Maricel finally broke her silence. With Carmen sitting beside her hospital bed, crying and begging to understand what had happened, Maricel told her everything. The inappropriate patient, the scholarship trap, the abduction, the 73 days of imprisonment and repeated rape. Carmen's response was immediate and fierce. She contacted a lawyer, a women's rights organization, and eventually Dubai police through Philippine authorities. The wall of silence that Khalid's threats had built began to crack. Detective Al-Balushi received the new information in April 2020, nearly 6 months after Maricel's initial disappearance. Her testimony, delivered via video conference from Manila with trauma counselors present, provided the missing pieces of his investigation. But building a prosecutable case remained challenging. The villa in Fujairah had been sold to a new owner who knew nothing about its previous use. The guards who had maintained Maricel's captivity had returned to their home countries or disappeared into Dubai's vast migrant worker population. The documents Maricel had signed under duress created legal complications about consent and voluntary participation that Khalid's lawyers would exploit mercilessly. What finally broke the case was technology. Maricel's phone, which had been found wiped clean, was subjected to advanced forensic recovery. Technicians managed to retrieve fragments of deleted data, including GPS location logs that hadn't been completely erased. Those logs placed the phone, and therefore Maricel, at the Fujairah villa for extended periods matching her captivity timeline. Property records showed Khalid had owned the villa, selling it in January 2020, timing that correlated suspiciously with Maricel's release. Financial records showed payments to the security personnel who had guarded the property, traceable back to Khalid's corporate accounts. Most damning was evidence from other victims. Once Maricel's case became public, 3 other women came forward with similar stories. Different details, but the same pattern. Inappropriate attention from Khalid, rejection, then systematic targeting that ranged from harassment to outright abduction. None had reported previously due to fear, visa vulnerability, and the certainty that their word against a billionaire's would be worthless. The weight of multiple testimonies, physical evidence, and financial forensics finally provided grounds for arrest. On June 15, 2020, Dubai police took Khalid Al-Manama into custody, charging him with kidnapping, rape, human trafficking, and abuse of power. The trial began in September 2020 and lasted 5 months, becoming international news that exposed the darker realities beneath Dubai's glittering surface. Maricel testified via video link from the Philippines, her voice steady despite visible trauma, describing exactly what had been done to her and why. Khalid's defense argued consent, suggested Maricel had been a willing participant who regretted her choices, attempted to paint her as a woman seeking financial benefit by making false accusations. The strategy backfired spectacularly when prosecutors presented the other victims, the forensic evidence, and expert testimony about trauma responses that explained Maricel's delayed reporting. On February 8, 2021, Khalid Al-Manama was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 25 years in prison with no possibility of parole. The verdict sent shockwaves through Dubai's elite circles, proving that even billionaires could face consequences. Even powerful men could be held accountable. For Maricel, the conviction provided closure but not healing. She continues to live in the Philippines, working with a trauma therapist, slowly rebuilding her sense of safety and agency. She has become an advocate for healthcare workers' rights, speaking at conferences about the vulnerability of female professionals and the need for better protections. Carmen completed her degree, though the scholarship that funded it will forever carry the weight of what it cost her sister. She works now as an accountant, sending money to support Maricel's therapy and their parents' needs, trying to repay in some small way the sacrifice that was taken from her sister without her knowledge. The case prompted reforms in UAE labor law, enhanced protections for healthcare workers, and stricter monitoring of wealthy individuals' interactions with foreign staff. Al Noor Hospital implemented new protocols for reporting patient harassment, ensuring that complaints are investigated immediately rather than dismissed. But systemic change comes slowly, and thousands of women continue to navigate the dangerous intersection of poverty and power, where survival sometimes requires accepting conditions that should never exist, where doing everything right still isn't enough to guarantee safety. Maricel's final message, delivered at a nursing conference in Manila in 2022, "I did everything correctly. I maintained boundaries, reported inappropriate behavior, followed every protocol, and still I was taken. This isn't about what victims did wrong. This is about what powerful men think they have the right to do. Until that changes, no amount of careful behavior will protect us." The photograph that accompanies news articles about the case shows Maricel before her abduction, smiling in her nurse's uniform, confident and proud, young and full of life. She doesn't look like that anymore. Trauma has aged her, left visible marks that makeup can't hide and time hasn't healed. But she survived. She spoke. She helped ensure her abductor faced justice. And in doing so, she joined the long line of women who have transformed their victimization into advocacy, their suffering into strength, their silence into testimony that might protect others from similar fates. The security footage from the parking garage still exists, archived in Dubai police records. Sometimes investigators review it during training sessions, using it to teach about the importance of acting quickly when someone disappears, about recognizing abduction patterns, about believing women when they report feeling unsafe. Those 47 seconds capture the moment when Maricel Santos's carefully built life ended and her 73-day nightmare began. But they also capture her resilience, visible in the way she stepped backward, assessed the situation, made calculations about survival that would ultimately save her life. She walked toward that Mercedes because she thought she was protecting her sister. She survived what happened next because she refused to break, refused to give her captor the satisfaction of destroying her spirit along with her body. And when she finally spoke, when she finally broke the silence that fear and threats had imposed, she didn't just save herself. She saved the next woman Khalid would have targeted, and the one after that, proving that even the most powerful predators can be stopped when their victims refuse to stay silent forever. If you've stayed with this story to its conclusion, subscribe to demand better protections for healthcare workers globally. Share this to raise awareness about the vulnerability of women working in foreign countries. Remember, Maricel did everything right, and it still wasn't enough. The problem isn't victims' behavior, it's predators' entitlement. Your engagement with stories like this creates the social pressure that drives real change.